Well, the Tokyo Games are done and dusted, but all eyes now turn to Beijing 2022, the Winter Games. It's shaping up to be one of the most controversial Winter Games, with organisers facing a string of challenges, including the COVID pandemic and a potential boycott. Joining me live now is our Asia correspondent, Adrian Brown. Adrian, good to see you. It's hard to think that this is just a couple of months away now. What are the problems that China's facing?
Well, as you pointed out in your introduction, Laura, of course, the great elephant in the room is COVID-19. The virus is continuing to spread in China. It is now affecting almost half of China's provinces. I think that, by February, China will get that under control. And let's be honest, we're only talking about 900 infections so far in China in July and August compared to the United States and Britain. That is a tiny number. But of course, China is pursuing this zero tolerance policy when it comes to COVID-19. I think they've been looking very closely at what the Japanese did, the organisers of the Tokyo Games, and I think that has provided a template for what you're going to see at the Beijing Winter Olympics. That's to say, empty stadiums, a lot of screening, a lot of track and tracing, and of course, possibly the creation of a large bubble as we had in Tokyo. But the question is this: will China allow foreigners to come into the country to watch the Games? At the moment, people from outside of China wanting to enter the country have to do 2 weeks quarantine. Will they lift that requirement during the Olympics and indeed in the days leading up to it? I think the other big worry is actually protests. They're worried about the possibility of athletes staging some sort of political gesture as they stand on the podium, whether it be over Hong Kong, the situation in Xinjiang, or indeed over COVID itself. And looming large is also the worry of a corporate and diplomatic boycott. At the Winter Games in South Korea, that event was attended not just by Mike Pence, the US Secretary of State, but also by Princess Anne. Now, I think it's highly unlikely that a member of the British royal family will attend the Games in Beijing, and I think it's also extremely unlikely that a US Vice President will also attend those Games. And what they really want to avoid also is, of course, a boycott by the athletes themselves, by athletes, let's say, from Canada, Australia, and other countries not turning up at the Games. So far, we've seen no indication of that happening, because at the end of the day, the decision is up to the athletes, but that would cause a lot of embarrassment to Beijing were that to happen.
Indeed. And look, no one is immune from knowing about how diplomatic tensions have been on the rise for quite some time, not just between Australia and China, but the US and China as well. We see war games being conducted between allies. Indeed, we had one in our part of the world between the US and Australia just a short time ago. But how provocative do you think these upcoming war games with China and Russia will be?
Well, these war games, Laura, actually began on Monday, and they're due to last for 5 days. They're being held in northeast China, involving some 10,000 troops. They are the 30th war games that China and Russia have held since 2003, and that's a measure of just how close militarily these two countries are becoming. Of course, they fought a brief border war almost half a century ago. They were enemies for a brief period. But now they're walking very much in lockstep, and they're walking in lockstep over issues like Afghanistan. Just a few weeks ago, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted a delegation of Taliban officials in the Chinese city of Tianjin, and he warned them in pretty blunt language that they should distance themselves from armed groups like Al-Qaeda. What China worries about, because of course China borders Afghanistan, is a return of groups like Al-Qaeda and perhaps even ISIS. So with Russia and perhaps with other countries, it's hoping they can perhaps exert some sort of influence in the chaos that is now unfolding in Afghanistan. It's also possible, of course, that perhaps the Russians, the Americans and Chinese will see merit in working together to try to prevent the security situation in Afghanistan deteriorating. Of course, as we speak, Laura, a sixth province has now fallen to the Taliban. And, I remember being in Afghanistan just after the Taliban were dislodged in 2001, and it was a broken, fractured country. And at that stage, the government basically held just the capital. 20 years on, that is beginning to look like it's going to be the same thing again.
And just very quickly, can you really see China, Russia, the US and allies working together to save Afghanistan once again?
Look, I don't think that the Russians are going to allow the Americans to, allow their fighter planes to take off from Russian territory. But I think it's possible that China may be able to exert some sort of influence. You know, let's be honest, the Russians have got their hands burned in Afghanistan, so too have the Americans. What can China do? Well, China can, I think, offer possibly investment. It can offer, you know, help in that regard. But it's whether, you know, the Taliban is able to work with China, which of course is a communist state. The Taliban are hardline Islamists. Yeah. So it's going to be a difficult marriage.